Welcome to Conscious Compassion, hosted by Charles Gray
and Laura Darrell. This podcast will share stories of the different ways that people deal with low moments in their lives.
How they manifest the drive to overcome obstacles and keep pushing forward. A fluid space with media, poetry, music, literary readings, or just plain storytelling.
Coupled with in-depth interviews of the storytellers so that listeners can learn, relate, and be inspired.
Spend a moment with us as we explore creative coping strategies for these chaotic times. Conscious Compassion,
where we share because we care.
Welcome to the maiden voyage of Conscious Compassion. I'm Charles Gray.
And I'm Laura Darrell.
And we are going to be interviewing a wonderful guest today. His name is Matthew R. Meckes. He's a musical director, a composer, a writer, and a kind of cool guy I had the good fortune to work with during a show. He was my musical director in the show, and we found that we had some similarities in the way that we approached music, and that led to a friendship. And I'm very, very excited to have him here today because I know he has an interesting story, and he has managed to produce some amazing stuff. And I'm really excited about him being able to share that with you today.
Thank you so much for being with us, Matt.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. Hi, Laura. Hi, Charles.
So tell us your story for people. We got a little introduction to you just now on how you know Charles, but for those who don't know much about you, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I think Charles gave a pretty good summary. I'm a music director. I've been working as a music director for the past probably 10 years or so, maybe a little more at this point. And music has been a part of my life since I was a kid. I started playing piano when I was 3. I started taking lessons when I was 8. Art and creativity has always been a part of my life. And certainly this past year has given me a lot of opportunity to explore that in many different ways. And as Charles said, we met doing a show called Passing Through that I music directed and that he was in at Goodspeed Musicals. Beautiful show. And also, as Charles said, I think we have a very similar take on music, and, Charles's voice, as you can all hear, is just like
just
butter.
Butter. Exactly.
You all kill me. That's funny.
That's sort of a Cliff Notes.
So in terms of what was your pandemic experience? How's that? Well, where did it take you, and what was completely new and something that you had to really work your way through?
Well, I guess the best place to start is at the beginning. So I, right before everything kind of shut down. So, for anyone who's listening that doesn't know, the theater industry has been shut down for over a year this point. And there's been some pockets. Yeah, I know it's almost hard to it's hard to say it, to actually vocalize it. But I was kind of on a dream contract. I was working with Lynn Ahrens and Stephen Flaherty in Florida, which is gorgeous down there. And,
Tiny Dancer?
Knoxville.
Okay, Knoxville.
Show called Knoxville. It's a brand new show. They were doing it at the Oslo Theater Company. I was not music directing. I was music assisting, but I got to be the rehearsal pianist for the 3 weeks that I was able to be down there. Mm-hmm. And it was just sort of this. It was a magical experience. I mean, I never thought. Anytime I end up working with people that I have sort of looked up to, writers I've looked up to, I always end up in these situations where I'm like, I can't believe I'm here right now. Um, so that was sort of where I was when everything shut down, and it's a very vivid memory for me because it was actually, we got shut down on a Monday. It was our day off, and Stephen Flaherty and I had decided to go to the beach that day. And so we're driving to the beach, and the whole car ride to the beach, he was telling me stories about writing ragtime and when he first came to New York, what
Oh my
that was
God.
like.
That must have
Wow.
been so cool.
Yeah,
Wow.
meeting Sondheim and all this, all this just amazing, incredible, like these tidbits that you would never get, just watching his shows or watching an interview. And we pulled into the beach parking lot and got the phone call from the artistic director of Oslo saying that, they were going to halt everything.
Mhm.
And, I just remember us sitting there in the car, and I couldn't imagine what was going through Steven's head, because at that point, several of his tours had been shut down. I think there was a Once on this Island tour that was out that got shut down. Anastasia was starting to get shut down around the world. And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and he was like, "So what do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I think we should go to the beach for a little."
Right. Nature.
Just
Heal.
because I didn't know what to do. And we had a really lovely time. We just sort of sat on the beach, waded out into the water, just sort of continued chatting. And the one thing that really stuck in my mind is, talking to him about my path in theater and musical theater and as a musician. And I just remember him telling me that I was on the right track. And it was like, how do I put it? It's
Validating.
yeah, it's like your
Life
father
affirming.
saying, "I'm proud of you, son."
Yes.
It was to have someone like Stephen Flaherty say that to you, especially amid a moment when everything seemed uncertain. And I didn't even know at that point how uncertain things were going to end up being. And so we spent like an hour at the beach. Then we left. We got back to the hotel, and by I would say 6 o'clock that evening, my car was packed, and I was back on the road to Pennsylvania.
Wow.
Sort of moving forward from that. Kind of a lot of strange things happened in my life. Prior to going down to that gig, I had been looking at houses in Jersey. I'd been planning on buying a house, and I was talking with my family, and we just sort of said, well, let's keep looking. I'm not going to let this thing bring everything to a halt in my life. So we kept looking, and then in June, I ended up closing on a house in North Jersey.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Indeed.
Thank you. Once I was in the house, my parents would come and visit on some weekends. We kind of do like an every 2 to 3 week thing,
Nice.
just to, I don't know if we were consciously doing it, but it was sort of like, okay, we'll visit and then we'll go away. And if none of us are feeling ill or anything like that, then we, we'll do this again in 2 to 3 weeks. Because at that point, it was the 2 week was like the magic number.
Yeah, right.
For everyone.
The 2 week that became much more.
Yeah. And but I was also dating somebody at the time who I had been with for over 2 years at that point. And she would come by every so often, and we would try to get together, and that sort of leads me to the next stage of my pandemic life, which is in October. So this is after about 3 months of being in the house by myself and with my dog, of course, my beautiful dog. Our relationship kind of fell apart, and she left me, and that sort of put me in this totally different headspace. And initially I was trying to distract myself I was trying to find anything I could to not feel the things that I was feeling during that time, which, I describe now as despair. Which is different to me than depression, because depression has its own sort of baggage that comes with it. But despair is like this. It's like you are in a dark room and you know there's a door somewhere, but you can't see and you can't move, and you're almost like comatose. I think depression is sort of the knowledge that, at least for me in my life, I mean, I've always had depression. I've always struggled with depression. And so I've had years of sort of experience dealing with that. So for me, depression is sort of like, I know that hope exists, and that this is a state of mind that I am in right now. But with despair, it felt like, you know, it felt like hope wasn't even enough to pull you out of it.
Right. Oh, that's
I
that's
get it.
scary. I get
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that sort of that was a difficult time, and that sort of culminated in early February for me. In early February, I experienced a series of very intense anxiety attacks. And I had had some anxiety attacks before in my life, and I kind of been able to work my way through them. But these were so overwhelming. I was not able to function. I was not able to move. Walking was difficult. My heart rate was all over the place. I felt sick even though I wasn't sick.
Yeah, isolation gives you all kinds of time to think about that stuff.
Yeah, and it's the physical manifestations that happen with anxiety are,
Right.
they can be brutal.
Yeah.
So in early
Debilitating.
February, that exactly, it was very debilitating, and I was concerned for myself that something bigger was going on that I was not able to control or understand. And so I went to the doctor and got on some medication. And a few weeks after that, I started therapy. And that's sort of where I'm at right now in my process. I'm about 2 months into medicating and going through therapy. And, and writing poetry, and I'm also working on a book right now, has sort of been my outlet to express all of the things that I am feeling. A lot of it has to do with the loss of this relationship, which was very devastating to me. This was somebody that I thought, that I was certain I was going to be spending my life with. And so writing became, I don't want to say escape, because that makes it seem like I'm avoiding it, but it really, it was on top of the actual medication I was taking, it was my spiritual medication.
It was your way
Yeah.
of processing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a way of getting through.
It's really wonderful that you were able to be so present in your own needs. A lot of people can't do that. A lot of people can't self-diagnose themselves and say, I need to get help.
Yeah, there's a problem here. Yeah, it's funny because I have a old friend from high school who I've talked to a lot about this, and she also suffers with anxiety. And that's one of the first things she said to me. She was one of the first people that reached out, when I was so I've been posting my poetry on Facebook,
Yes.
and she reached out at one point. She was like, "Hey Matt, I want you to know I really love your writing, but are you okay?"
I'm
Because
so relieved to hear that.
because some of it got dark, and I knew it wasn't me. It wasn't dangerous,
Right.
dark, but there were things coming out of me that certainly to someone who is paying attention would probably look at that and go, there must be something going on.
But
That
you,
was my interpretation because I
Mm,
saw your posts and the pictures of you and Dixie, right?
yeah.
Right. I saw the pictures of you and Dixie, and I started reading some of the things that you were writing, and that was exactly what I thought. I was like,
Mm,
okay, this boy is going through some deep stuff,
do
and I
yeah.
you
really hope he's okay.
do you think that the I mean, I think it takes a lot of strength to be willing to convert what would otherwise be a period just full of despair into something remarkably beautiful. I'm do you, do you feel like creating putting words to your expressing yourself in a creative way was just as important as the therapy um and the medication, or
100%.
Yeah.
Yes. As I am, and I would say I'm certainly not out of the woods, but I can now see the forest.
Good.
And I am trying to take on this perspective that this might be one of the best things
Mm,
that has happened to me.
there you go.
that's
Because
powerful.
yeah, and it's hard to explain why, because it's heartbreak. It's a lot of crap being brought up to the surface, especially about my past and my childhood. And I've always wanted to write poetry. I've always wanted to write a book, specifically a book that centers around some of my life experience. And while I've done some writing in the past, I've always had this blockage. I've always had this thing that has stopped me. I'll get partway through a paragraph and go, oh, this just isn't any good. Like, what am I doing? Like, why am I trying to, you know, why am I trying to be Tolstoy? Why am I trying to be Bukowski? Like, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing here? And in a weird way, the because I was at such a low place, I gave up the expectation that whatever I was putting on the page had to be good.
Mm.
And I started writing from a very honest place and not filtering myself, not censoring myself. A lot of what I write is first draft material. And that is mostly because when I'm writing, it is a manifestation of what is going on in my body, in my soul, and in my mind in that moment. And when I start to go back and edit that, it starts to feel put on.
Hmm.
And so, one thing and this is why I say I'm thankful, is that I feel like, you know, what happened, losing this relationship, and that coupled with having my entire career, which I have worked for since, sort of unconsciously since I was 3 years old, be put on hold, and my entire social life get put on hold, and so much loss. And then not only the loss in my own life, but the loss that we are constantly hearing about every day on the news. It's like, everywhere you go, it was death, and I had to find a way to continue living amidst all of that devastation. I think my writing was my way of continuing to live, because I wasn't really able to pivot. I think a lot of people have been able to pivot and take on new careers, or switch to something else that maybe they had been doing on the side, but now it's their full-time thing until stuff gets back to normal. But for me, music is kind of all I've had my whole life, and losing this relationship, watching all of these opportunities just sort of melt away. I was like, I need to put this in writing. I need to allow myself to have a voice now.
Do you think you would have started writing in this way at this length and depth if this hadn't happened? I mean, kind of going back to why you said this was potentially one of the best things that's ever happened to you. I just find your writing to be so moving and really beautiful. And I think I told Charles, I was like, I'm sad, I'm happy, I feel less alone. Do you think uh, this you would have gotten here if you hadn't been forced to make the time for it?
Yeah, no, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
To put it simply, something, that, we work in theater, the schedule is just insane.
Right.
And I rarely have time when I'm working to focus on my own creative outlets. But I think more than just having the time to do it, I think it was giving myself permission
Mm.
to do it. By end of October, early November, when I found myself truly alone, something just clicked. And like I said, I've stopped filtering myself. It's weird because I stopped trying to be poetic, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And what happened was poetry. Just an evolution happened within me that I was not conscious of, but something took over.
You found your voice. I have found, at least for me,
Mm-hmm.
um, things can get so bad that you literally have nothing to lose.
Mm-hmm.
And you can reach a point where you're like, well, F it.
Yep.
I'm just gonna go with it.
Yeah.
And whatever comes out is what it is. And if people like it, then yay. And if they don't, hey, it's what I need right now.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Exactly.
and in this weird way, by you just going writing for yourself, people respond to it. It's almost like when you try to write for other people, you're trying to please this invisible master that you can never quite please. Whereas when you drop down into what you need, suddenly everybody clamors in that that's exactly what they needed.
Yeah, I think you're both like nailing this on the head in terms of what was going on mentally for me, because it was a sense of I have nothing to lose because I've lost so much already. And Laura, with what you're saying, I think what I had been doing in the past was writing not for myself, but for some kind of mythical objective, to, like, I don't know, have a New York Times bestseller, or like see my book at a bookshelf in Barnes and Nobles, and like, crap like that. And
Right.
I gave up all of that, and I said, I'm just going to write, and it's going to be what it's going to be. Bumps, bruises, all of it.
I think this is a perfect segue into one of your poems. We should let people experience it. We keep talking about it, so let's have that. we are going to play for you. You were kind enough to let me read it. Somewhere along the way. My love for you was a ladder to the stars, and I climbed as high as I could until the air became too thin to breathe and the blue dome of Earth turned to unending black and empty space. There I watched below the dots of life scatter from door to door, shuffling off to some job or some date. And I wondered if they knew such heights, if they had seen the world from up here. But as I looked down, I realized that somewhere along the way, you had gone. Somewhere along the way, you had turned back. Afraid of the sky, the shallow breath, the endless night, the heat of the sun. You see, up this high, the ladder swaggers and sways, less sturdy than the rocky ground and the deep soil. The rungs grow thin and are patched with glue from others who had dared to hang on and fell from splinters and gusts of wind. I am not sure when you left, if the hazy skew of clouds frightened you or if the cool air burned your skin. But somewhere along the way, I lost you. And when I looked down and saw you weren't there, I looked back to the sky and climbed a little more. Maybe you had passed me, or maybe I had missed the start and I would find you somewhere along the way. So I climbed to the end, to where the footing was so small I could barely stand, afraid I might fall like so many before and so many to come. I looked down once more and realized you had gone. I jumped from the rungs, too scared to go on. I watched as the black turned to blue and the clouds followed suit. I thought they might catch me, but I fell through and through. Past the cool air and the birds and the tops of trees to the solid earth. And for a while I lay there, silent. Broken bones and cracked skull, and looked up at the ladder and looked up at the stars. They seem smaller now, too small, too far. I thought about how somewhere along the way I stopped looking for you and started to repair myself. One small rung at a time. And soon the stars would be within my reach, not gone astray. Somewhere along the way. There's a prescient, raw energy that I feel when I read your poetry. You had contacted me and asked me to read one, and I was like, "Yay, that'll be fun." But then I went on Facebook and I read some of your other ones, and I was so moved by yet another poem that I just spontaneously did it because it was like I have to do this.
Yeah.
I read it and I knew who this. It was like that perfect script that you spend your life waiting for. Where it's like all of a sudden somebody hands you a character and it's like, oh my God, you do realize you just handed me, right? Of course I can read this.
I love that.
And what's so beautiful about that is that Matt wrote, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, this is pretty presumptuous of me, but you wrote you. And Charles
Right.
went, that's me. Like,
Yeah.
how gorgeous is that?
Related to it completely.
Yeah, that's something that I have experienced quite a bit since I've started doing this, and since I've started posting this poetry on Facebook. Is sometimes people will message me privately and just kind of go on this whole I don't want to say rant, but they just sort of tell me how like hard hitting or how personal a poem was, or how much it felt like exactly what they were going through. And it's like you said, Laura, I am only writing from my own point of view, but I do strive for universal. I try to make it personal, but I also do my best to not get so personal to the point where it's like, oh well, he's talking about Susie down the street. Like, this could be anyone. This could
Right.
this could be anyone.
Well, I mean, they always say that the greatest art is born of pain, and you've
Agreed.
had plenty of it. And but not everyone is able to express it this way.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I think is so uniquely special about your writing, because there is something about it that you can just. I for me, it kind of goes up in there with Kahil Gibran. It's like ancient writing, but anybody can pick up the book and go, whoa, because the experience of love and pain and death and all these things, they are universal. It doesn't matter where you're from or how old you are or whatever, you're going to go through it.
When you sit down to write, when you sat down to write this poem, did you have certain questions in mind? Did you have a particular person in mind? Like, what was the germ of it? Or did you kind of just empty your mind and just started writing? What was your process?
They're all sort of different. This specific poem actually began while I was waiting to go into a therapy appointment. I was sitting in the waiting room, and I was listening to music on the way to the appointment in my car, and a lyric in one of the songs I heard was "Ladder to the Stars," and for some reason, the first line of the poem, "My love for you was a ladder to the stars," became it was the catalyst for the entire poem, because suddenly I could see the visual of myself climbing a ladder to such a height that I could barely breathe, and climbing and climbing and climbing, and then at some point along the way, looking back and being like, "Oh, I'm alone." And I think that's something a lot of people tend to do in relationships, that they if once the communication starts to disappear, and the 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 sort of attitude of "we are doing this together" starts to disappear, you sort of desperately climb those rungs, going, okay, well, we're gonna go, and I'm gonna fight for this, and I'm gonna keep building this ladder and building this ladder, and not realizing that this other person has already left. They started climbing back down the ladder a while ago. Yeah, and this was one of the first ones too, where it, rather than ending on a question, or rather than ending on sort of an unfinished, I guess it's a sort of unfinished, but a lot of my other poems sort of, they don't end with a sense of like, I'm going to pick myself up, or if they do, it's still in the tone of I'm still hurting right now.
Right.
And this was the first one, the sort of that final twist at the end of somewhere along the way, I stopped looking for you and started to repair myself.
I
That
loved that
from
line.
Right.
Yeah, and that was when I wrote that line. It sort of like punched me in the face because like I said, a lot of times these tend to be stream of conscious for me, and so I didn't know that I was going there while I was writing the poem. I wasn't thinking as I was writing the poem, okay, I'm trying to get to a place where I can repair myself. But I got to that where I sort of, recanted the chorus of the poem, so to speak, and I was like, it has to be different this time. Something has to be different. And repair myself just kind of smacked me across the face, and I was like, oh, okay,
I love that
here
you
it
just
is.
said chorus because one thing that struck me about your poem is how musical it was, and how lyrical and musical it truly was. I felt like I was hearing refrains kind of repeat themselves, but I was also building towards a musical climax. If you can hear my dog, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
That's my dog just
I
feeling
didn't know whose
musically
it was. We
inspired.
all three of us have dogs, so it's like it
I
could
feel
have been
like
anybody.
every podcast for the past year has had a dog
Has a
barking
dog.
at the back.
Oh, my neurotic little mini poodle. But yeah, there was a musical build to it, and then there was a denouement, and it was. I could.
Well, I have to give a shout out to this. Sort of takes me back to college, but I had a poetry professor in college, Pat Pattison. I remember sitting in his class one of the first couple days of class, and he read to us Robert Frost's poem "Birches."
Ooh, I love Robert
And
Frost.
yeah, and I Robert Frost has always been one of my favorite poets. But the way that he read the poem just completely changed my entire world with poetry, because I realized in that moment that poetry is music. I think
It's a
it, I,
journey.
it is
There's
a journey, and the rhythm becomes as important, and it's the melody and the way you break up the lines. It's basically the same exact thing as composing a song for a singer. And he really opened my mind to that, and so I have to thank him. And I mean,
well, good job,
I'm so
teacher. It
good job, teacher.
translated.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that's that I've been able to kind of incorporate that into my own work now.
Question.
Yes.
Your line about repairing yourself and the fact that it was stream of thought, stream of consciousness, did it correlate with where you feel you are personally? Do you, in writing that, was there a recognition that, hey, all this, the choices that I've made, the therapy, the medication, all of the above, it's working and I'm getting better. I'm feeling better.
Yeah, I don't know if it was on a conscious level, but I do think that that is feeding into it. Because it's some days are good, some days are bad, some days are both good and bad. And I've noticed too, as as I'm moving forward in some of the poetry I've been writing, like the past week, the past couple days, and again, I'm not trying to find those things. I'm trying to let those things happen. Sort of, I'm sort of just trying to let them come out of me, as opposed to me deciding, okay, I'm going to write a poem about getting better. I was struck by a Bukowski poem I heard recently called So You Want to Be a Poet. And it's a really great poem for anyone that enjoys poetry. It's by Bukowski. So You Want to Be a Poet. And so I found this line, and it's in the course of the poem, he's talking about, saying, if it doesn't flow out of you, don't do it. If it, all this stuff. And then finally he gets to the point of, it will do it by itself, and it will keep on doing it until you die or it dies in you. And
Ooh.
that really struck me, because I think in the past, a lot of times the words have died in me because I've overthought it, because I've tried to force it, I've tried to make it into something. And this sort of newfound freedom of just write it, just let it happen.
Just get out of your own way.
Exactly.
Which is the hardest thing to do, it seems.
The hardest thing in the world to do.
Oh, my God.
It is the hardest thing in the world to do. I feel like I just walked into an audition. My God.
Initially when the breakup happened, I threw my focus into what I would call surface level problems, which is like where I would put things like, and I hope like no one hates me for saying this, but I consider politics a superficial issue in our society. When the breakup happened, I thought, well, maybe I can try to solve some of these things, or maybe I can talk my way through some of these things. And I realized very quickly that you can't, that right now there's so much noise.
Yeah.
And rather than try to deal with the minutia, I wanted to deal with my own sorrow and my own complexity. And perhaps in doing that, it would speak to somebody.
And it did.
Yeah,
I'm so thankful for that.
So here's a question.
Yes.
You've written this poetry, and it has all become part of the therapy and the full expression of who you are, and I love it. Mm-hmm. You said that you've always wanted to write a book.
Mm-hmm.
Where'd that come from?
Well, how personal to get here.
Oh my.
Go for it.
Let it out.
Bare your soul.
I think I just heard a zipper. Go ahead.
I don't want to give away the book. I guess I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but I feel like I've had not a unique story to tell, because I think it's something that a lot of people have been through in their life, unfortunately. But so I mentioned that when I was around 8 years old, I started taking piano lessons. And around 12 or 13, that same piano teacher molested me. And it was a very, these are like formative years of your life, 12, 13. It's like, I'm just discovering who hormones. I am, and hormones, and I mean, sexuality and all that sort of thing. It's became very, very complicated. And on top of that, the situation was complicated because he was also an employee of the school that I went to. He was the music director for the musicals.
Oh, wow.
At the school that I went to. So I couldn't get away. But after this happened several times, I left the studio, and I sort of I walked away from music for a period of time. And at one point, I reached out to a friend whose brother was also in the studio, and I reached out to her and basically told her what had happened to me, and that I was worried about her brother because I had heard this man talk about her brother often, and it reminded me of the things he would say to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I had also reached out to another student of his who had confirmed that some inappropriate things had happened with him as well. So I felt like I was justified in this, and I wasn't trying to get him in trouble. I was trying to save this young man from experiencing a potentially traumatic event in his life.
Right.
And this girl's mother called my mother. My mother was an employee of the school, which means she was a mandatory reporter.
Oh, wow.
And it became a legal issue. And I'll sort of jump ahead, because I know we're short on time here. I'll jump ahead. It did end up going to trial, and they found him innocent.
Ugh.
Oh, wow.
And so I've had to
Oh, wow.
sort of live my late teenage adult life knowing that this man is still out there. This man is still teaching children, very respected teacher. And in many ways, I owe him some gratitude, because I wouldn't be the musician I am today without sort of those first formative years before things took a dark turn. But the book came out of the sense that I remember leaving the DA's office right after the trial ended, and I at that point I didn't know. I wasn't blaming anyone. I wasn't. I think I was just so in a daze at that moment, and they informed me that I because of the way the trial ended up, I wouldn't be able to use his name, but that I could write about it
Wow.
if I wanted to. And ever since then, I've thought, someday I feel like I need to write about it, because an injustice has happened here.
Indeed. And
And
you talk about all the depression and stuff that you've dealt with through your life. I mean, if that's not a catalyst, I don't know what is.
yeah, well, and it's there. This guy was a mentor for me, and he was a close friend to
Right.
me.
Trust issues, everything.
And so all of that stuff, so the despair I felt after the relationship ended this past year, also brought up, some of those abandonment issues. And not that I want to even, compare, because that relationship was nothing, like it. But anytime I experience loss like that,
Right.
and have to untangle myself from those webs, I feel like I'm reliving some of those same experiences I was having back then. And so the book, after the breakup happened, I decided, I had written some small excerpts. I had sort of thought about some things I wanted to do. It started off as kind of like this travel log, and I was going to talk about all the places I've been, because I've done a lot of traveling around the country. And through that, I was going to sort of flash back to this incident and how it has formed and implicated almost every other aspect of my life.
Wow.
And I part of me decided, well, I'm still going to go with, telling sort of this broad range of stories. But I'm going to make this event the thread that weaves this book together.
I think the concept of what you've done and how you're trying to put it together sounds amazing, and I can't wait to read the whole thing. But for now, we are fortunate enough to have an excerpt from your book, and the working title is At the Jagged Edge. And this excerpt is called The Fiddle and the Fish. So here we go.
The Fiddle and the Fish. Late summer on the high plains of western Nebraska. The yellow long grass caught glints of jagged sun, thorny bristle lining the edges of buttes, and clattering hooves in a distant stable. The streets grew quiet as a chapel and shrunk in the late hours of the day. Tourists had begun their sojourns back to civilization, leaving echoes of their caravans in the valley pass that crested a nearby hill. It was quiet and serene, untroubled. For much of my life, I had been wrapped up in the fast pace of youth and drunken nights in cities where the lights shine so bright you would swear the sun never sets. It had been a sprint towards pure euphoria and total experience. The tragic comedy of bold choices and life-altering mistakes. All this had brought me here, to a remote town no bigger than a few dozen acres, and the dwindling remnants of summer blooms. I stood with my back to the whitewashed wall held together by barn slats. Chips of rain-weathered paint fell to the ground from the brush of my shirt. The sun beat heavy on the dirt gravel road that ran alongside the theater, a worn-down converted barracks that had seen some of the first Western settlers peek over the yellow-hued ridges of Fort Robinson. History laid out before me like a tapestry of carved sandhills and horse-trodden paths. Everything felt old and full of memory. Even the wind carried the chill of a million whispering ghosts, eager to unburden themselves of a landscape largely untouched by time, their gusts heavy and deliberate. My foot slid out against the sandy rock as I braced against the pleas of the dead. As the gravel topped my shoe, a beat-up station wagon skidded to a halt. Inside was a wide-eyed Wallace, the fiddle player for my band, inhaling a hand-rolled cigarette and blasting Willie Nelson from the stereo. Over the music, I could hear him shouting with unnatural glee, "You want to go fishing? I haven't had a moment to myself, and I've been thinking about throwing the line all day." "Wally," I replied, "we're about to do a show." But he insisted, and with brevity my roots were plucked from the hard soil and swept onto a dusty road. The car careened through tight corners, welling up a cloud of inhibition in our wake. Clinging to the faux wood door handle, my body slung from side to side before coming to a quick halt next to a small lake tucked in the remote brush. Wally jolted from his seat and tore open the hatch, securing the rod, stringing the line, and tying the lure. Before I could shut the door behind me, he bounded off, his stride stretched like taffy to a small clearing where yellow grass and plumes of cattails gave way. I watched as Wally cast his line 3 times. He caught nothing but swamp grass and a few waning moments of sunlight. But to him, it was unbound freedom, and a chance to take back a few stolen minutes in the pursuit of something more than fish. I began to wonder if there were some memory he was trying to catch, if he had seen a shadow of his youth in the murky pool, if he was trying desperately to get back there somehow. Casting and reeling, slowly for a few feet, a little faster, then a wriggle of the rod, slowly again until the lure leapt from the water and swung gently into the palm of a goofy, grinned country boy. It was as if he had turned off the world, every throw a reclamation of youth, every empty lure a harsh reminder of the fierce urgency of now. But the now had melted away to a beaten path and the smell of tall reeds catching the wind some 15 years earlier. My hand tightened around the fishing rod as I felt the coarse palm of my grandfather's hand brush against the back of my own. I gripped the line as he guided my pull, enough to tie the lure, gazing intently as he wove the delicate yarn into a knot barely discernible to the eye. His fingers were wide and flat at the end, nails neatly cut, lines dug deep into the flesh. It seemed impossible to me that these hands, scarred and bent, could handle a thing so fine with such care. My own hands, but half the size, fumbled like a newborn calf tripping over its own feet, grasping at the thread as the loop slipped and snapped straight as a whip. "Begin again," I muttered to myself. The lure dangled a few feet from my face. Specks of light glistered from 3 menacing hooks fastened by a small ring to the back of a bright yellow minnow. I inched to the shore and held the rod firmly with both hands. The water's surface was like an opaque trampoline, rippling footfalls carrying currents of whispers. There was a ritual to all of this, a steady patience, a heavy calm, a short break in the wind, and a slow breath. I could feel small protrusions from the rocky bank through the soles of a worn-down pair of Nikes. Tension and bliss stood on either side of me as I tried to steady the rod. My grandfather spoke softly. "Remember how I taught you?" A slight Dutch accent fell from his tongue, eliding over vowels, consonants wearied by the foothills of eastern Pennsylvania. "Let go of the line right when you feel it tug." A cold breeze grazed my cheek as I pulled back, and without hesitation slung myself forward, the tip of my shoe breaking the water's surface. My finger, which had held the line taut, gave way to the unspooling of what looked like a stray strand of silken web, hoping to anchor itself somewhere in the abyss below. Some memories live in us like an old ball cap too tattered to wear and too delicate to wash. They sit neatly on a mantle, collecting the dust that falls from the sawing away at time. Each moment etched into the walls of our bones and the halls of our beating hearts, echoing down long corridors like the sound of children playing on some distant playground. Had it been too long? Had I let slip the precious moments of my life and given weight to all that was wrong with the world to forget such innocence? I crawled my way back to the present as the station wagon sidled up to the building's edge. The motor puttered to a stop, and Wally looked at me with eyes leaden from late nights and broken promises. "Thank you for that," he said plainly. Behind the faint cracks of ember ash falling from his cigarette and a thick drawl dripping from the sides of his lips, there was sincerity, fragility packaged in a blue flannel and an old pair of Levi's made rough by the untamed West. "Sometimes a man's gotta fish, you know." "I do," I replied. I dropped my words through the carpet-woven seat, though I tried my best, with silence, to tell him I understood. That I knew some part of him had reached out to a memory and touched upon it with gentle quiet. A childhood untouched by the scars of wandering hands and empty words. Eyes wide and heart open. He nodded and began to walk towards the side entrance. I could see the long chain of my life tying me to the womb, forging the links of the mistakes I had made and lessons I had learned. The lake in my mind grew smaller, and the fish more scarce. I looked for truth somewhere beyond the wheat plains and the dusty roads, truth in the joy I had felt as I watched Wally cast his line, hopeful, like a child, and what sorrow I felt in knowing that so much had been lost, that these moments came not from an embrace of life, but a desperate attempt to find my way back to it, in murky ponds and empty lures, in memories burnt at the edges, jagged and creased from being folded up and stuffed in my wallet, in the wisdom that's born of age, knowing that the road is long, full of twists and turns that ring you about like a used dish towel. My hands clung to the car door handle, turning the tips of my fingers red and knuckles white. "Let go," I whispered to myself. And so I did. Before long, my feet stood firmly planted as though I had never left the paint-chipped wall and the dirt-gravel road. I lit a cigarette and breathed in what time I had left. Soon I would be in a dimly lit room, surrounded by 100 faces I'd never met. My hands would speak through hammered strings a music that was born of pain and betrayal. A secret life hidden far from the picturesque landscape before me. "Places!" the stage manager hollered from behind the large sliding barn door. breaking the heavy silence. I inhaled the last of my cigarette as I rounded the corner, taking my usual entrance through the back of the theater to a small staircase that led to the stage. As I took my place behind a slightly out-of-tune living room upright, I looked across the stage to Wally. He nodded his head and tipped his hat with fiddle in hand. I nodded back. We began to play. There's such a profound motif of memory and nostalgia and trying to sort through in this weird, kind of literally and metaphorically going fishing for what innocence that's lost. I found this sample of your book to be, I mean, it was prose, but it was also still poetry. I mean, like you still
so
write
visual.
so beautifully that
thanks, guys.
It was like Dostoevsky without the pain of having to read 50 paragraphs about a flower, because it was also visual for me. I could smell it, I could feel it, I felt like I was there.
At
and
the
I
lake
thought,
fishing.
wow,
Yep.
this is cool.
And I felt like my grandpa was, because I'm thinking back to, tying the lure on and my fingers fumbling and just being so uncoordinated with it. I was like, yes, yep, been there.
I think it's what happens when you write from truth. And I think anybody is capable of this, whether they have the vocabulary or not. That to me, the most beautiful writing, it doesn't have to be a 400-page novel. It can be a 10-page pamphlet, as long as it's honest. And I will tell you that everything in that excerpt, while maybe somewhat romanticized by the language, that's all really happened.
Yeah.
Awesome.
The events with Wally, and I mean, Wally is a character in and of himself. I was like, I have to put him in this book because he's such a great I mean, this man lived in Texas for a while, and one of his jobs was riding in helicopters and shooting wild coyotes. So this is the kind, and now he's like playing fiddle in my band in Nebraska. So you're like, what, like, who is this person?
Many layers.
Right.
And I sort of found that, I've experienced this a lot in my travels where I meet interesting people like that, and I'm desperate to know their story.
Yeah.
I'm like, what brought you here? What took you from there to here? I mean, he would tell me stories about that. He ended up in a trailer once with Willie Nelson, just like jamming with his fiddle. And he was like, we were all high and drunk.
I was going to say high as hell.
Yeah, high as hell. And I was like, what kind of life have you lived? What an awesome experience.
And why wasn't I there?
Right, exactly.
Right.
Take me.
But when he came, sort of barreling up to the theater, and I remember it like it was yesterday, because we were literally 20 minutes out from doing a performance, and he rolls the window down and he's like, we're going fishing. And I was like, Wally, we have a show in 20 minutes. What are you talking about? He's like, we'll be back before then. It's fine. It's just right up the road. I was like, okay, well, you know what? I'm going to go with you because they can't start the show without me. So if I'm not back, at least, they won't like, we won't be lost, without a fiddle.
That's so
and,
funny.
He like drove 60 miles an hour through these dirt roads in the backwoods of Nebraska and came up to this lake that he apparently would go fishing in often. And I just remember watching him and having this moment where, in betwixt my sort of, nervous anxiety of like, okay, well, okay, come on, like we have to
get back to the show.
But I had this moment where I was like, what's going on here? What is this man doing right now beyond just he just needed to fish.
He was exercising some kind of demons, and you need to know where they were.
Yeah, and it was, I think I say in the reading, like reclaiming some lost minutes of his life.
Yeah.
And as I get older, that's something that I feel rings true to me, because time becomes such a precious.
So precious. Yeah.
Oh, just wait, children.
I know.
Please
It's
don't even get me going.
That's what my parents tell me. They're like, wait till you're our age.
It's really true. I mean,
Thank
how
you.
many people research like what, when people are on their deathbeds, what do they regret? What do they wish they did more of? And it's always like moments like that. They wish they had taken time to go fishing with their family instead of like trying to climb that corporate ladder.
Nobody wishes they worked more. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah. And I think the best thing that came out of that experience that I tried to capture in that that chapter of the book is that Wally and I had a new understanding, or at least I had a new understanding of who Wally was when I came out of that. And that was the beautiful thing for me, that, that sort of the final moments of that chapter of, and that nod that happens at the end of the chapter, that's something that we then did at the beginning of every single performance.
Right.
After that.
It was a beautiful moment of connection. I mean, I really felt like you saw him, and I got that in your work.
Well, I'm so glad that reads, and you did such an amazing job. Charles was like, Laura did the reading for the book excerpt.
Laura's a pro.
Love it. I loved it.
She's good.
Thank you.
I knew who I was throwing it at. Yes. I'll do the poem. She'll handle that. We got that.
You both read beautifully.
I know she knows what she's doing.
When the full book comes out, Laura, I'm going to give you a call.
There you go. There you go. Pass that gig along.
Thank you for trusting me.
Well,
with it.
Matt, I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you
enough for coming on and sharing all of your wisdom. For our listeners, anyone who wants to hear more of Matt's story, get more information about him, or share this episode again, maybe with a friend, you can find the information, the contact information for us and for Matt on our website at consciouscompassion.net. And I urge you to do that, because I think his is a story that needs to be shared. So thanks again, Matt. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing all of your wonderful words and your artistry.
And as we've learned, his story is our story, and there's a beautiful connection that that true artists offer us, which cannot be understated in its value as a way to get through hard times.
Well, thank you, Laura and Charles, for having me.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Conscious Compassion. We'd love to hear your input and to hear what you do to make it through.
You can reach us on our website at consciouscompassion.net. We've got some amazing interviews coming up that we can't wait for you to hear.
Until then, catch you next time. I'm Charles Gray.
And I'm Laura Darrell.
Conscious Compassion, where
Sharing is caring.